Next, without further ado, today's presentation is scoring and retraining ML models using managed data pipelines. Our speakers are Sonia Carlson and Lynn Gasch. Sonia is a principal program manager with the Azure Data Factory team. She previously worked in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry on laboratory and data analytics platforms for genetics and gene expression analysis. Lynn is a senior software development engineer and currently develops the Azure Data Factory integration with the Azure Machine Learning service. She previously worked in AI research focusing on data mining, information retrieval and management, network, and computer security. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and switch the presenter here to Sonia. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Luis. I'm just going to get my presentation up there. Okay. Okay, let me know when you can see my test slide up there.
All right, we can see it.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone for taking the time to listen to us talk today about machine learning and managed data pipelines. And thanks, Luis, for giving us this opportunity. I understand that there's kind of some variability in the audience, so we'll try to go through with a little something for everyone at different levels. This is meant to be sort of a mid-level intro to some of our Azure properties like Azure Machine Learning, alongside our big data properties and services like Data Factory to pull those things together. So it doesn't mean that these concepts can't be applied elsewhere, but those are the group of services that we're talking about today. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, slide's not advancing. There we go. Okay, so a couple of objectives and takeaways we wanted to make sure that the audience leaves with today. And if we fail miserably, please tell us, and we will try and fix it for the next time we give this talk. Lynn and I did give this presentation at our Machine Learning and Data Science conference, so hopefully we've incorporated some of that feedback. So today, we wanted to, as a takeaway, we wanted to kind of introduce you how you can learn to score large-scale data as managed batch execution. So if you have a model that you've built just sort of on your desktop kind of for your own consumption, but you really need to operationalize this for kind of a broader scale usage within your organization and have that run on a regular schedule, we're going to talk about and show you the tools to how to do that. We'll also touch on a little bit about when and how to retrain your model, and you can do that with and without model evaluation, and we'll show you when and how you can intervene to do model evaluation after retraining. Then finally, we'll kind of take you through the concepts and tools that you can use to actually do these kinds of activities and leverage some of our big data analytics platforms like HD Insight, Data Lake Store Analytics, SQL Data Warehouse, etc. And you can put that all together as a managed data pipeline. So that's our goal for today, that you come away with that. If you have questions, I think the chat window is open. That Luis is going to help us proctor. And if there are further questions or follow-ups, we'll point you to some resources at the end of the presentation that you can go and explore. Okay. So when we think about, let's step all the way back and ask ourselves, why do we even want to do these kinds of things? And why does Microsoft care? Why do we even have these sorts of services? Well, we understand that there are businesses and customers out there that have kind of specific analytics scenarios and problems that they want to solve. For example, as you guys are probably all familiar with, you may want to do a sentiment analysis. How is the world feeling and how are they talking about your product? Or you may have some physical properties that you need to monitor and you want to do some prediction on, predictive maintenance. So you may have some streaming device data that's coming in or something like that that you want to evaluate. You may want to look at marketing campaigns or any number of scenarios that are out there. And so, what we're doing is we want to make those particular use cases easy for people to kind of pick up and deploy, tweak a little bit, and have them run in their own business context. So you don't have to be a machine learning expert. You don't have to be a Hadoop expert to get these things to work. So that's kind of what we're heading towards. And the start of that, as we put together our suite of services, some of you may have heard of these, is called the Cortana Analytics Suite. And all that means is that we're bringing together kind of the heavy-duty, heavy infrastructure and compute analytics services of Azure with HD inside, with the speech, along with the personal assistance of Cortana. So when we start to put those things together in a way that's easily consumable, we can make it easier to kind of pick up these types of analytics scenarios for people to use. So that's a little bit of the context of why we're doing this. We don't intentionally just drop a bunch of individual services out there that are hard to put together. We understand there are pain points as you try to compose these things. But just so you get a sense of the roadmap of where we're going, we are making it a frame to make it easier to compose those services together to solve these kinds of use cases. So that was a long-winded way of saying that today we're going to look at a use case focusing on customer churn. So this is an example taken from the telco industry, where you have customers that find it very easy to switch their mobile service providers, and so the telcos want to be able to predict what are, based on certain demographic and usage features, who's likely to switch, and then they can take action on that. They can intervene. They can make you, they can say, hey, how about we'll give you 30% off or something like that, something they can do to retain their customers. So this is a model that is kind of a common analytics scenario. And just as an aside, if you go to virtual labs on MS TechNet, we do actually have the customer churn scenario as a virtual lab that you can deploy into your own Azure subscription. So this uses parts from the machine learning gallery, the customer churn model there that's in the gallery, and we put that together, and you can walk through those steps and deploy it. It is quite a long lab. It takes a couple of hours to do, but if you want to experience that end-to-end yourself, you can do that. Additionally, the other use case we have that's up as a virtual lab on MS TechNet is the personalized product recommendations. So this is essentially capturing shopping behavior as someone's browsing on the web, crunching it through a Mahout machine learning engine, and then pushing out product-to-product recommendations and user-to-product recommendations. So the user can see products they might like based on stuff they've previously clicked on, and products they might like based on what other users like them have liked. So, and that just, you egress that out to a database, and you can, push that out to your website. So those are two examples of some of the labs that are out there. If after this conversation, if you want to go ahead and try those things, they're up on MS TechNet. Okay, so how do we kind of get started with this? For those of you who are not familiar with Azure Machine Learning, I would encourage you to kind of go and take a look at it. There's some get started documentation, but essentially what's there is a way for you to kind of construct an initial machine learning experiment. You can kind of modify it and do some exploratory work, and ultimately what happens is you end up with the final trained model, and then with that model you can publish that out as an endpoint. And so here we see that labeled as the scoring endpoint, because with your complete model, now you're able to score new data. So once you have that out there, when you have new examples that are coming in, You can shape that data, apply some transforms. You may need to partition it. We'll talk a little bit more about partitioning later. And then you want to score that new data, and you want to put those results somewhere in some database or data mart or somewhere that you can consume it and visualize it with your Power BI or other app that you might be using. So we go from beyond just kind of the isolated ML experiment that you've done kind of on your desktop and giving you capability to publish that out and run this as an end-to-end flow. Well, that's great, you might say. You might not say, but where it gets better is that you might say, well, I want to now run this regularly. I need to make sure that it's robust. I want to be able to monitor it. I want to know when things are going wrong with my flow as I push this out to my organization. And so with a tool like Azure Data Factory combined together with Azure ML, you can run this thing as a managed pipeline. So you have all of the monitoring capabilities, and it's all in one place, even if you have data sources and new examples that are coming in from many different places. So these are the kinds of things that you can construct, and I'm just kind of going through a conceptual flow. When we turn it over to Lynn, she'll actually walk you through the tools so you can see what that looks like. She has very graciously built out a bit of a demo to show some of this. All right, so you can run this, so you can take your simple experiment, publish it out, and then run it on a recurring basis. And you can deal with large data sets through the managed pipeline. Oh, okay, that text, that's what I just said, so I'm going to skip that. Okay, so in a perfect world, that's excellent. But we all know that the world changes and our models over time become inaccurate because many reasons, as most of you know these things. Maybe something in the underlying data distribution might change, so your model becomes slightly off. You might figure out that you need to partition your data based on different segments that you're trying to evaluate. So an example of that might be if you have a call center that's located in, let's say Charlotte, North Carolina, and you're processing customer service tickets there, and there may be some parameters there that are useful to look at as a feature of your model. That may be very different than a call center that you have located in, say, Amsterdam. There might be different parameters there that are interesting for that model. So you might want to partition all of your data based on region, for example. And for that, you might need to slightly tweak and train the model differently. If you're doing something like forecasting, maybe you've used previous values that were estimates, but now you know what those values are, and so you want to go back and reincorporate those real values to improve your forecast. And then you may have something that's more drastic, like a schema change of your model. So there are new features or new predictors that are out there that you need to now incorporate. So in kind of the first three cases, those are opportunities where you can take your existing model and simply kind of retrain it with new labeled examples. Excuse me. In the last case, that's not really an opportunity for retraining. You actually have to go back and build a new representative model to incorporate those new features and kind of redevelop that. So, when your world changes, you want to be able to adapt to what that change is. Okay, so fortunately, you have this already running as a kind of a robust managed pipeline. You can go back to your ML experiment, and previously we published a scoring endpoint. Well, we can also publish a training endpoint. And so once you do that, you have new labeled examples that are coming in. You can retrain that model, and you can update what your scoring endpoint needs to be. And so you can kind of feed that newly trained model into your scoring endpoint. Now, you can also run that as a managed pipeline. So you can have these kinds of flowing, perhaps you want to retrain your model every month. just as a matter of course. You just want to make sure that your model is constantly up to date, and so you just want to retrain it, feed it into your scoring endpoint, and as your new data comes in, you just want this thing kind of running. So you can run these kinds of pipelines side by side. Now, that could be risky, because as we just discussed, when the world changes, you may have different situations, and after you do your retraining, you want to kind of make sure that the retraining is actually accurate. So you may want to set up some evaluation techniques or some custom logic, and so you can do some of that evaluation work kind of recursively within Azure ML, or you can write custom .NET code to kind of do that type of evaluation and provide kind of a logic gate before you go ahead and update your scoring endpoint. So all these things can be implemented using the combination of Azure Machine Learning and Azure Data Factory. And then you can also run that just as a managed pipeline. Okay, so that was kind of a quick, maybe not so quick, tour of all the concepts that are required when we talk about training and retraining and models and machine learning and pipelines. So let's start moving into kind of what the tools are and the basics that you need to know about those tools. So with Azure Data Factory, if you're not familiar with it, it's a cloud-based data orchestration and data integration service. So you can kind of think of it as a SQL agent in the cloud. And so we orchestrate data movement services, transformation services like HD Insight, Data Lake Analytics, and you can put all of those services together into one pipeline, monitor them all in one place. Immediately I know people will ask, is it the same as SSIS? And I'll leave that to the end. It's not. We are not a traditional ETL tool. We orchestrate transformations that are done by other services. And at the end of the talk, we can go into that if there are more questions about that. So for Data Factory, the concepts you need to know, we have the concept of an activity. So that's just an action that you take on your data, takes an input, performs the action, produces an output. We have a pipeline, which is just the logical grouping of those activities and the dependencies and the sequence of those activities. And that allows you to do things like if you have a pipeline that has 100 different activities in it and you want to pause that thing or restart it or redeploy it, you want to be able to do that as a group. And also grouping it for your, depending on the context of your business, like you might have a marketing analysis pipeline or a sales pipeline, something like that. Datasets, just a named reference to the data that you want to use as an input, as an output, and as an output. And then we have the concept of a linked service, which tells Data Factory how to actually connect to the different services that you're going to use, like Azure ML, Azure Storage, your SQL Server, and all of your compute services. So with those concepts, you compose together your different activities into a pipeline, like I showed, managed pipeline 1 and managed pipeline 2, and you run all of those, and you can monitor them all. So those are kind of the basics that you need to know for Data Factory. On the Azure Machine Learning side, with that tool, if you haven't seen it before, you can publish those models as a web service, and that web service has instances, the web service endpoint that we use for the scoring endpoint and the training endpoint. And then you have a trained model. So these are kind of the concepts that you need to understand how to put these two services together. All right, so that is, here's some quick resources for you. Luis, I'm not sure if we publish these decks afterwards. If not, I will send you the links directly. But there's some great links. The learning path for Data Factory is a step-by-step guide that shows you how to use different aspects of Data Factory. You can also use the Visual Studio plugin if you want to create some of that custom .NET code that we talked about for model evaluation. Lynn has produced some great documentation on how to retrain models, there's ADF and ML documentation too that you can read through the steps that she's going to take you through. She has a great blog that talks about it. We talked about virtual labs on TechNet, and then we have the standard forums, MSDN, and user voice. All right, so with that, let's turn it over to Lynn, and we can get to what you really want to see, which is what does it look like and what is this demo?
All right, thank you, Sonia. Let me go ahead and switch presenters. And by the way, we can follow up with an email to everybody providing the slides or the links or any resources that you guys want to share.
Okay, so it looks like I am up for showing my screen, and hopefully people can hear me.
Let's see. Yep, we see your screen and we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sonia, for your explaining the background of everything that we're doing. I want to start this presentation in the Machine Learning Studio. You can go to studio.azureml.net to play with this yourself if you want. And I'm not really sure how to get rid of this, so I'm just going to move it over here for now. This is a very simple predictive experiment that I built in ML Studio. And as we go through this and have time at the end, I'll come back and show you some more interesting things that can be done here. But basically, in machine learning, there are provided for you a number of algorithms that you can choose and run over your input training data to produce a trained model. And so this is a simple two-class decision tree that I have over actually a very small data set just for demonstration purposes, and we can talk more about what you would do in a big data case. In this case, I have a blob that reads the input, and it applies the trained model to produce an output which is scores, the predictions themselves. Here is the example of the output from running it previously. And in this case, in the output, I happened to just run it over the training data as well. So you can see that it has labels, but here is the predicted values. And for some reason, even though I've run it over the training data, it's not 100% confident about its predictions, but that is, I guess, because we didn't overfit the model. So this exists in Azure Machine Learning. And then in Azure Data Factory, you can create, here's my Data Factory, and you can create pipelines that will execute this on your schedule. So here is my churning pipeline, or sorry, my churn scoring pipeline. If you open this up, you see that it only has one activity, which is to do this batch execution. Data Factory is really a batch execution or batch processing approach for scheduling your workflows. And if you want to do your scoring on a cadence, such as daily, hourly, weekly, down to 15 minutes at a time, you can put this on a schedule and a cadence. If you want to do something more like streaming, then machine learning does have also a streaming interface where you could set up your scoring. So in this case, I have a blob input, I have a batch execution activity to do the scoring, and I have the scoring output. So we talked about how over time, as you drift away from your training data, you need to go back and retrain. Now in machine learning, you actually develop this training experiment first. This is where your scoring experiment derives from, but it's funny because when you think about what you need, you think about needing scoring before you think about needing retraining. This is the original model that, here's my decision tree, here is the trained model, this is the scoring output, and when I converted it to a predictive experiment, okay, I didn't actually change anything. When I converted it to a predictive experiment, you see those modules still showing up here. So in the training experiment, when I want to retrain, what I want to do is take a new input. I want to train and emit a new trained model. So a trained model is a .ilearner formatted file that is the representation of this model that can then be applied to make predictions over other inputs. So this is the output of the trained model, and when I run through a pipeline, this is what I'm going to use. If I had Sonia's slides up, you would see this is the thing that goes back and replaces your model in the predictive experiment. So how does that look in Data Factory? If I go back, let's see, can I refresh this? Okay, here's my training pipeline. And in this case, I have two activities because I have my training input and I have a batch execution. It's also a batch execution service from the machine learning endpoint. I will emit an output, an evaluation output, but I also, this is what I'm interested in this case, I will emit that representation of the trained model. That trained model becomes input to another activity that actually goes and patches my endpoint so that I apply that new trained model the next time I do scoring. So now if we go back to the Data Factory, I can show you a little bit. This was my training data for the first time that I ran this. And I took that training data and I basically just flipped all the bits for retraining. You can see I changed all the labels that were ones, I changed them to zeros. In Data Factory, these are the concepts that Sonia was talking about, where I have a linked service. A linked service is really just an indication for Data Factory of how to access your resources. So in this case, this is my machine learning endpoint, and that's the key. And so Data Factory can now use this information to go access that endpoint on my behalf when it runs my pipelines. There's also storage ones, which basically are just connection strings. The data sets, so the linked services sort of say kind of where and how. The data sets say what. So from that storage linked service, take this folder and this file to do the training. So that's not my churn one though. So the churn training input, this was my original one, and now I'm going to make it my space dash space retrain one. Okay, so now I've changed the input. I'm going to upload this. And hopefully I've typed it correctly. And then we're going to go into that training pipeline. So this training pipeline uses the data sets that we showed previously. It first does the batch execution on the training input, and then it does the update resource using the output of the batch execution to update the model. I have a pipeline schedule here that's in the past, so it's already run, and I'm going to update it, but I'm actually going to just move it forward a day so that it's in the past, so that it will start running right now. And then I'm going to deploy that. So from here, I'm going to go back and find the, I want my training output data set. Sorry, I need to scroll down and it won't let me yet. Okay, let's go to my data sets. I want my placeholder output data set. And we'll probably see, if I've selected the right one, a new slice running here. Okay, so while I'm waiting for that to get set up, let me go back to, well, I want to show a couple things in Data Factory first. Okay, here's my pending slice here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the kinds of linked services that we have. So if I go back to that author and deploy, and let's say I want to say a new data store. These are the different storage types that Data Factory can interface with, and this list is growing all of the time. So these are different places that you could pull your data from or push your data to using Azure Data Factory. And then also these new computes. So we have HD Insight that you can either manage your own cluster or we'll provision a cluster for you. So if you have big data, you want to do some, Hive or Pig processing on, Hadoop processing on as part of your pipeline before you go do your scoring and predictions and that kind of thing. We also can provide compute on Azure Data Lake Analytics. There's the Azure Machine Learning and also Azure Batch. The other thing to show, since this is a SQL conference, is from Azure Machine Learning side, they also have these readers, these reader modules. This is a reader module, but there's different types that you can use. So it doesn't have to be blob to blob. You can, and they're also increasing their types of things that they integrate with here as well. So you can actually pull and push directly to Azure SQL. There's also coming, or I don't know if it's available yet, but even integrating with on-prem SQL. So let's go back to Data Factory. We'll look for that slice in the data sets. And this was the placeholder output. Okay, so this is still in progress. The training may take a bit of time to do. So I think at this time, if Sonia has comments, or we could probably take some questions while we wait.
Okay, this is a good opportunity. There's a question. The question is, can Data Factory open zipped files? Let me make sure I'm reading the entire question. Oh, read zipped files and pull files out of them. Okay. Yeah, extract the content of a zipped folder.
Okay, so you broke up a little. You said zip file, right?
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, Data Factory can connect to on-premises file systems. You can copy over any binary compressed, so gzip. Yeah, there's a couple zip formats we support, and so you can copy that over just as is in binary format, or we can support the extraction. I think it's either it's only Avro in text. So we can't handle zip. There's some caveats on the exact formatting, so which off the top of my head I don't remember exactly, but that's roughly it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think that we can take another question. If so here it is. I'll read what's on the questions window. So to recap, I can take my input data, have it available in SQL, then set up Data Factory to perhaps weekly pull in data, process it, maybe send it to my machine learning models, and then make it available as various outputs, and that's a question.
Yeah,
yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a common flow that we see.
Okay. That covers all the questions that we have at this moment.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I just did. What I just did is now I've gone back to the scoring pipeline, and I've bumped it forward. This one is set to run on an hourly schedule. So I've bumped it forward 1 hour to cause it to run now. And then we're going to go look at the output of it and see that the prediction should have all flipped because I flipped the labels in the training input. So go ahead, Sonia.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the other thing that might be, it's a little bit of an aside, but while we were waiting, something that might be interesting for this audience, if you haven't seen it before, we just released a brand new feature, which is a copy wizard. So it's a simple UI to copy data from store to store. You can, like for example, you can copy from on-prem SQL Server up to SQL Data Warehouse. It's a very easy setup, so we can kind of run you through what that looks like. If there's time and people are interested in seeing that while we're waiting.
So another thing about authoring Data Factory pipelines is what you're seeing here is the experience that you can have in the Ibiza portal, which is uses a JSON format editor, and you do get tab completion and syntax highlighting and all of that experience in it. We also have the PowerShell plugin, so that's in the the Azure PowerShell, and as well we have a C# SDK. So there's various opportunities for interfacing with Data Factory for operationalization of your pipelines. Okay, so now that slice is completed, and I'm going to go to my Storage Explorer and open this CSV. Oops. Let's see if I can just look at the content as text. Okay, so this was the class from before, and this is the prediction now. And so you can see they were all one-to-one mapping, but since I flipped all the bits in the training, now they're all opposite. So even though this actual label was 1, because we ran it on the retrained model, we predicted it 0. Here's a 0, we predicted it 1. So you can see everything got inverted because of the retraining and the update of the model. So that pretty much concludes the demo. If there's other questions or comments.
Let's see. I don't see any additional questions regarding the retraining of the model so far, but it looks like there's interest in seeing the copy wizard. Oh, yep, there's some questions. What kind of model type was this? I think it was
that was a boosted two-class decision tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really quick one. So.
And then the next question is, one of my issues as an ML prediction newbie is to know what Azure steps to take, and you moved too fast for me to follow. All right, ideas. Yes, we can provide a number of links. As a matter of fact, I'll follow up right after this meeting with a number of links to Channel 9 where you can see a ton of videos about Azure Machine Learning, Data Lake, and all the related services.
So I think there's a poll after this, or I guess this is a self-directed group. So if there's interest to come back and do something more of like a hands-on lab or a presentation where we actually go build the training experiment from the ground up, instead of just sort of this overview, we'd be happy to set another session to do that sort of thing.
Great. I think there'll be a lot of interest on that, so we can chat later and see if we can put that on the schedule. Let's see, any other questions? All right.
These are some of the kinds of algorithms or training models that are available to you in Azure Machine Learning today. Azure Machine Learning also supports writing custom Python and R modules, so you can actually construct your own machine learning, and then you can use Azure ML as a hosting environment so that you can hit it on an endpoint to do scoring and training.
Great. So I think just to go back to one of the initial feedback, so if we have a few more minutes to cover that copy wizard, I think there was some interest in seeing that as well.
Sonia, do you have that?
I do, yes.
Okay, great. Can you make Sonia a presenter again?
Absolutely. Let's see.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay, let me see here. Sorry, I'm trying to move some of these things around. This panel, oh, hide panel, there we go. Okay, show my screen.
And there are a few other questions that came up. So.
Okay, let me know when you can see that, my screen.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, so you just access the new wizard from within your data factory. So I happen to have one here. My connection just became very slow. Okay, let me know when that appears on your screen.
It looks like it's loading still.
Yes, my connection is very slow. Okay. All right. So in here, so within your data factory, there's a button here called Copy Data, and this is the preview feature we just released on, I think it was last Friday. So what this does is this takes you to an app which is actually outside of the Azure portal, similar to our monitoring and management, which is also outside of the Azure portal. Remember earlier I talked about a frame on how we're kind of putting all these services together to make it easier to consume. So this is kind of the first step of that. I might not, I'm on my home network, which is terribly slow. Let's see what happened here. Wow, I seem to be having a connection issue. Tell you what. Oh, here we go. Finally.
I was about to say
Okay.
we had other questions. If we need to move on to something else, that's fine too.
Yeah, here we go. So essentially, it's a wizard that takes you through. You can choose to run your pipeline on the schedule, or you can do a run once, and you just click through, select the source you want. So in this case, you can choose. We don't support all of our sources yet today. We'll be adding them, but we have quite a few key ones that people are interested in. So let's say you have an on-prem SQL server, so we can select that one. And then I'd give it my connection info, and oops. And if you don't have a gateway on your on-prem server already, you can go ahead and create it, and it will take you through another wizard to create that gateway. So you connect to it, and then what it will do will pull up your tables that are on your on-prem server. You can go ahead and you can preview the data that's in there to make sure that these are actually the tables that you want. And you can select some, or you can select all of those tables. So it's a nice little wizard that takes you through, and then you select your destination store. So in this case, SQL Data Warehouse. Choose your server and database, so connection strings, etc., etc. and takes you right through. Okay, and then you do your table mapping, so you can choose the table that you want to map to. You can preview the data and the schema. You can do that on the input side too. I forgot to show it. The other thing I forgot to say is beyond just selecting tables, you can actually run a query to choose the data that you want rather than just like selecting all tables or some tables. So you can preview the data on the destination store. You can preview the schema. And you can do this for every pair. So just to validate that, this is what you want to do. You can also validate your query if you want to pull up your data via a query. You can select the columns that you actually want to include in the copy. There's a repeatability setting here you can choose. This is for item potency, so how you want to handle duplicate data as this is happening. So you can read more about how each of these works. So you can select a setting for your item potency. And then you get a summary. So this is your pipeline summary, properties, etc. And you just finish. And that will actually deploy your Data Factory pipeline to do your copy. So again, you can do this as one time or on a recurring schedule. And you can select the sources via that wizard. Now, as soon as it's done deploying, now I can look at that pipeline in my monitoring app. And when this is done, there'll be a link here that says something like, go to the monitoring app, and then you can see what that looks like. So that's a quick view of that new feature. It's kind of a useful thing, especially for folks who are working a lot with data movement, trying to get their data to the cloud, or especially into SQL Data Warehouse or Data Lake. Okay, questions? More questions?
Yeah, that's great. That will save a lot of typing for many.
Yeah. It really brings people down from taking a learning curve of a couple weeks to getting this done in 10 minutes.
Yes, absolutely.
I wanted to follow up. This is Lynn. I wanted to follow up on some of the comments that came up in the question board about having those slices running in the past. So Data Factory has a couple of modes. The first concept is slicing your data by time. So you could have a query or, say, a blob file path or something that was partitioned by year, day, hour, minute, whatever. And so Data Factory will begin slicing that data into slices and executing it on those boundaries. And so if I say that I'm running my pipeline in the past, really what that means is that I would be running it over past data. And the way Data Factory works in terms of scheduling is any slices that are scheduled over past data, it will begin backfilling those immediately. And then it would start following your prescribed cadence from that moment forward. So if I said run daily and I started a week ago, it's going to run 7 days worth, and then from today on it will run each day on the schedule. So I hope that clarifies that issue. There is also a notion of just scheduling on a cadence, and that's kind of new, and I honestly don't have a lot of experience with it yet. So that is a direction that we're going as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot more nuance around scheduling and those kinds of things described in our documentation.
Great. I think there's a question that's been asked a few times. I think there's interest on understanding the differences between Azure Data Factory and SSIS.
Right, yeah. So SSIS, as you all know, is kind of a traditional ETL tool. It has transforms that are there out of the box. You actually run the packages there. With Data Factory, what you're doing is you're actually composing other services that are running transforms. So a transform would be, say, a Hive script that you're running on HD Insight, or some custom transform that you're running on Azure Batch. And so Data Factory kind of schedules and orchestrates all of those different services together. It doesn't just run a Data Factory package. We're kind of bringing all of those things together. Now, we do have kind of the hybrid scenarios where you can bring data from on-prem to the cloud. what we're working towards on our roadmap is saying, are there simple things we can do, like can we reach back down to on-prem and say kick off an SSIS package as part of one of my data factory pipelines? So that's an example how we might start to pair these two things together. But that's something we're working through with our advisory board. If folks are interested in joining our SSIS advisory board, Luis, you can maybe connect me to folks that way to figure out kind of what that next version of our extensibility model looks like, so that those two things come together. But essentially, you can think about ADF would be like SQL agent in the cloud. So to schedule your SSIS packages, you would use a SQL agent, right? But ADF does scheduling, but it also does orchestration of other services. It does cloud resource management. So in a smart way, it will bring up the cluster that you need to compute to run your jobs, and it will tear it down depending on the kind of jobs, the schedule and the kind of jobs that you have. So it will manage those cluster resources for you. So it does some things beyond SSIS, and SSIS does some things beyond ADF. So ideally, we would pair them both together to get that full-blown hybrid data pipeline scenario. I hope that answers the question. If people still have questions on that?
I don't see any further questions on that, so I'm sure that if there are any follow-up questions on that answer, just please post them to the questions window. I think the other question I see here that is strictly related to Data Factory is, have you tested with very large data sets in the order of billions of rows? And I'm going to add to that, I'm guessing we're talking data movement.
Personally, no. We are providing out some processing and performance numbers. So in our documentation, there's an article called, I think it's just called Data Movement. And within there, there's a performance and tuning guide, which allows people to kind of make some comparisons based on the environment that they have and the kind of, how much they're trying to process. So, I mean, that's a hard question to answer unless you understand the whole context of what someone's environment is. But there are some numbers posted there that people can look at. And we are continually adding capability to improve the perf there.
Thank you. So I think we are at the top of the hour. There were a few other questions posted, but they're more related to Azure ML. So I think what I can do is I can try to perhaps follow up with everybody. We'll collect some links and resources that hopefully can help you get to the answers that you're looking for. And lastly, the last thing I'd like to say is, since I got everybody excited about events that took place in the past, so let me post here on the chat window just a link to some Channel 9 videos regarding uSQL, which is the virtual chapter meeting I was recommending earlier. Unfortunately, they did not record their presentation, but if you follow the link on the chat window, you'll see there's a ton of good videos there, short videos that you can watch in 10-minute time slices, to use a Data Factory term, at a time. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Sonia and Lynn. Thank you very much for making time to share all this information with us, and thanks everybody for attending today's meeting. As always, just if you have any questions or follow-ups, please reach out to us through the email datascience@sqlpass.org. So thank you, everybody.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.